In today's video, we're going over what to do in your athletes that have shoulder pain in the gym during overhead pressing. The folks that like to weight train and they have shoulder pain, generally speaking, the overhead press is one of those first exercises. When the shoulder starts to hurt, just throw it in the trash can, right? Just can't do it. It feels god awful. And the problem is that we know the exercise is actually beneficial for folks, right? So shoulder overhead press is great for health, great for the health of the shoulder in general. We don't want people to stop exercising, obviously. The other piece is that we know the exercise is actually beneficial for rehabilitation. So best case scenario, when your athlete has pain in the gym, we want them to continue pressing somehow, so it allows them to keep working towards their training goals without actually irritating over the course of time. And if we pick the right exercise, it can actually help them rehab too. So basically, finding the right exercise comes down to dose. And one of the things I tell my patients all the time is that if you have a headache and you want it to go away, you can take 2 aspirin, right? And if you take the entire bottle, it's gonna kill you, right? And if you die taking the aspirin, it wasn't the aspirin's fault, it was how much you did. The same thing goes for exercise. So if I have a lot of shoulder pain and I decide to go in the gym and do, let's say, 50 push jerks with 225, that's like taking the whole bottle of ibuprofen or aspirin, right? If I do 3 sets of 10 of dumbbell overhead press with a nice tempo, that's like taking 2 ibuprofen, which can help you lead to a good place. So in today's video, I'm gonna show you exactly how to find the right exercise for athletes who have shoulder pain that wanna continue overhead pressing. Step number 1 is just reducing the load with a given exercise, okay? Can't tell you how many times I've had an athlete come in, they say, you know, my shoulder hurts with overhead press, right? And what they tell me is that they can warm up, do all the warm-up sets, things feel really good, and once they get to around 80% of the 1 rep max, they're like, you know, I can't keep going, it just hurts too bad, right? So as the load goes up, so does the pain, okay? And generally speaking, we're trying to build strength, we're trying to build muscle mass in the gym by doing overhead presses. But if we reduce the load a little bit, we can actually continue pressing, working towards those goals, right? Maybe not quite as much towards strength because we have to reduce the load a little bit. We keep making progress and we can rehab at the same time, okay? There's a few ways you can do this. The first one I like to do is to mess around with RPE, or reps in reserve. So largely, if I reduce the RPE, let's say I'm lifting at a 6 out of 10 rate of perceived exertion, right? Or if I leave 4 to 5 reps in the tank, I'm still actually working towards my training goals, but I've reduced the load enough so that my shoulder isn't killing me, okay? Sometimes just changing the RPE is not enough. One thing you can also try is slowing down the reps. So if I move really quickly, that's a little tougher for my shoulder. If I slow things down, what ends up happening is that it usually feels a little bit better, and just because we use a bit of a tempo, so let's say about 2 seconds on the way up, 2 seconds on the way back down, you're forced to reduce the load. So maybe you're only operating about 60% of your 1 rep max, and you're doing 10 repetitions with a tempo, and your shoulders are absolutely smoked just because you have so much time and attention. It makes it a really hard exercise. Maybe you're not working on strength as much as you normally would with a heavy load, you're still building some nice hypertrophy, okay? And the last thing I like to do is mess around with the rep range. So your 5 rep max is going to be more weight than your 15 rep max. So if you're supposed to be doing sets of 5 for a given day, and you know what, shoulder's not really liking it, you can go up to sets of 15. And because of that, you just have to reduce the load. It might not have to be 15, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 10, but you get the point, right? You continue getting a good training effect, but we're not aggravating the shoulder in the process.
To go along with this video, I have a really nice guide for you today. It is the ultimate guide to getting out of shoulder pain. We go over 5 keys to learn so you can get your patients out of pain and back in the gym. Number 1, we'll teach you the basics about shoulder pain in the gym. Number 2, we'll go over modifying lifestyle and training so we stop irritating the joint and allow it to rehab. Number 3, we go over identifying and correcting mobility limitations that may be continually irritating the shoulder when you're training in the gym. Number 4, we go over correcting technique issues in the overhead press as well as the Olympic lifts. Number 5, I'll teach you how to gradually load the shoulder through a progressively more challenging strength program. This guide is 100% free. I'm going to leave a link in the description in the show notes. Go ahead and click on that and download it now.
So the first variation I like a lot, and you can take a breather, Mike, you don't have to go all day,
Okay.
but is the dumbbell overhead press. And the first reason why I really like this is because you automatically have to reduce the load a little bit with a dumbbell overhead press, because dumbbells are inherently a little less stable than a barbell. So if you just take your athlete from barbell over to dumbbell press, sometimes they feel better automatically, and that's actually pretty nice, right? The other thing about a dumbbell overhead press that's pretty nice is that you can change the elbow angle a little bit. Let's go into a rack position here, Mike. So generally speaking, if we had a barbell, we would have to have barbell here, and your athlete is usually trying to externally rotate to get their elbow underneath the bar a little bit and horizontally abduct. And sometimes for cranky shoulders, they don't like that, right? When I do a dumbbell overhead press, I can change this elbow angle as much as I want. So I can go elbows a little bit more tight, I can bring them out a little bit wider, and I can actually try a variety of different angles and see what feels best. How about we try 2 or 3 at that elbow angle right there? Very good. Let's try 1 or 2, bring the elbows a little bit more forward. Well, that's fine, we'll try that as well. Yep, go for it. Good. Which one feels better for you?
A bit more forward.
Yeah, so for Mike, the little bit more forward is maybe the right variation for him. What I will say is in the majority of folks, I don't know exactly why this is, elbows a little bit more forward tends to feel better than elbows wide. But at the end of the day, just use what works best for your patient. Another way to make the dumbbell overhead press a little bit more efficient for your patients is have them point their finger up towards the ceiling right here and go ahead and perform a few repetitions, right? While your patient is doing that, you steal their phone and then you go to the Fitness Pain-Free channel, click on the video, and then you can be very cautious about how you do this. You want to make sure to hit the like button and also the subscribe button, just like that. Very effective. Next exercise I like to try if dumbbells aren't working so well are kettlebells, right? So one of the reasons why dumbbells are helpful for the shoulders is because A, less load, they're a little bit unstable, right? And B, we can change the range of motion requirement at the elbow and at the shoulder, right? So the same thing goes for kettlebells. When I'm doing a kettlebell overhead press, I don't have to externally rotate the shoulder as much to get the dumbbell right over top of my elbow. And this is because the kettlebell naturally sits behind the wrist, and that changes the moment arm and the center of gravity. So essentially when I press, I can be in a relative internal rotation. I don't have to be cranked as much into external rotation. Try a few repetitions here just so people can see. All right, you can see when he starts, he doesn't have to have the elbow directly underneath the hand. He sits into a little bit of internal rotation, okay? So let's have you spin to the side here, Mike. Second piece, let's have you press fully overhead. Good. So naturally, kettlebell is going to sit behind the wrist, right? If you have a dumbbell, that's going to force the dumbbell in the hand directly over the shoulder, just like that. So whenever I use a dumbbell, it requires more range of motion to end range flexion. For the kettlebell, I don't need as much range of motion just because of where the kettlebell sits. You can relax for now, Mike. So for shoulders that are a little cranky into external rotation, also into end range flexion, utilizing a kettlebell can reduce some of that pain and make it way more comfortable to press. The next exercise I like to try if the dumbbell and the kettlebell is not successful is trying a landmine press, right? Landmine is nice for a few reasons. For one, let's go ahead and press fully overhead, Mike, right, and really lean forward. So in this case, it's really a strict overhead pressing angle. Now lean back a little bit for me, and then bring it all the way back down again, and let's do 2 or 3 reps. If he leans back and presses, he's really pressing on an incline, right? You can take a breather for now. So in the landmine press, we can choose to either press more strictly overhead, or we can lean back and press more an angle. And some shoulders don't like to press strictly overhead into this plane. So if that's the case for your athlete, just bring him back a little bit, and oftentimes it feels quite a bit better, right? Let's go ahead and grab this again, Mike. The other reason why I like the landmine press is because you're using your trunk and a little bit of the thoracic spine in order to rotate, to create a little power and momentum. So let's go ahead and we'll switch those feet up, right? And then drive, but when you do, I want you to rotate and reach. Good? And then come right back down again. Good. So if someone has a painful shoulder, if we're not isolating the shoulder quite as much by adding a little bit of trunk rotation to produce a little bit of force, it may reduce some of the stress in the shoulder and feel a little bit better, right? Now, last overhead press variation you can try is blood flow restriction training. Now, blood flow restriction training, or BFR, is not a type of overhead press. It's just a way to perform your exercises, and really you can choose any exercise with it that works your upper body. So you can see over here, Mike's got the BFR straps on, and what's really cool about BFR is that you only have to use 20% of your 1 rep max to get improvements in strength that you typically would need 60, 80% or more, right? It's improving strength and hypertrophy with a very light load. If you have a shoulder that just doesn't tolerate loading in general, we can get a very similar training effect, and we can respect that healing injury, and we leave the gym feeling pretty good as opposed to feeling terrible, right? So you can use any exercise. This is just going to be a Viking press handle, goes onto a barbell. It's like a landmine attachment kind of thing. Let's go ahead and have you press a few times. So this is unloaded, right? But if you wanted to be really scientific about it, we could try to figure out what his 1 rep max is and take 20%. But take home point is that it's light, feels good, and you're still getting a very good training effect, right? So let's say your patient comes in, they've got shoulder pain. We know we need to modify the overhead press for them. How do we go about doing this? First thing is you try to modify the load, right? Let's say that we can't find a tolerable load that works well for them. We start messing around with different movements. Starting with the dumbbell, overhead press, follow that up by the kettlebell. If the dumbbell doesn't go well, follow that up with a landmine if the kettlebell's not going well. And the last choice you have is just doing BFR, right? But if your athlete is tolerating dumbbell press really well, then that's your modification for that day. Now, what does tolerate mean? Training with a little bit of pain is okay for your patients. Generally speaking, you want that motion to be tolerable. And the first things I ask my patients when they do the modification, does that feel tolerable? And if they say yes, then great, it's probably good exercise. The other thing you can give them information-wise to choose if the exercise is too painful or not is give them a scale, right? So essentially, if someone has less than a 5 out of 10 pain-wise while they're performing the movement, and that night, the next day, they feel like they're back to their baseline with pain, it's probably an okay exercise. If you give an exercise, it's a little bit irritating, but it was tolerable, the next day they feel terrible, you probably chose an exercise a little bit too tough and you have to go back and modify a little bit, all right? But as long as you pick the hardest exercise you can tolerate that day, next day they feel pretty good, you're on the right path. All right, cool. Now you're an expert, learn how to modify the overhead press. Trouble is, most folks in the gym also have pain during bench press. So I have a video for you. I'm gonna leave a link in the corner right over here. We go over my favorite modifications for shoulder pain during the bench press. So go ahead and click on that link and I'll see you in that video.